Good evening. I hope everyone's having a great start to summer, and welcome to Congresswoman Sherrill's Coronavirus Teletown Hall. This evening, our town hall is focused on pandemic recovery. My name is Jill Hirsch, and I'm one of the Congresswoman's district directors, along with Kelly Doucette, who is also on the line. While we are waiting for everyone to get on, I'm quickly going to run through some of the logistical information for the call. We will begin the town hall with opening remarks from the Congresswoman and her guests, after which we will open up the line for questions. If you would like to ask a question, please press *3 on your phone at any time, and you will be connected with one of our staff members and then put in the queue to ask your question live. When you are given the opportunity to ask your question live, Kelly will call on you. Please try to keep the question brief so that we can get to as many questions as possible in the time that we have together. If we do not get to your question today, you can email it to the Congresswoman by going to sherrill.house.gov/contact. Any questions you might have regarding regarding unemployment or any assistance with a federal agency, please feel free to ask your question, and your call will be promptly returned by one of our caseworkers who are also on the line with us tonight. You can also reach out to our office directly at 973-526-5668. And without further delay, I will pass this over to Congresswoman Sherrill. Congresswoman?
Thanks, Jill, and hi, everyone. This is Congresswoman Mikie Sherrill. Thanks for joining us tonight for the Recovery Telephone Town Hall. As a nation, we've made great progress over the past few months stopping the spread of the COVID-19 virus thanks to vaccination and relief efforts across all levels of government here in NJ11. As we look to build back better in the wake of economic fallout, we still have a ways to go, but we're already seeing the positive impact COVID relief programs like the Paycheck Protection Program, Economic Impact Payments, the Restaurant Revitalization Act, and the Child Tax Credit have had for our recovery. Money from this package is reaching families, towns, and small businesses now, and we have great panelists tonight to answer questions about all of that. Beyond the American Rescue Plan, we're also negotiating an infrastructure package. I've been a fierce advocate for the inclusion of the Gateway Tunnel project and the repeal of the state and local tax deduction cap in this legislation, because these are two top issues for constituents prior to the pandemic and are only more important right now. I'd love to take your questions about these issues, and I'm sure my panelists will have information to share as well. As I continue to work in Washington on policies and programs to fuel our nation's recovery and to stimulate our economy in NJ11, it remains important to hear from constituents about what issues you're still facing and what questions you have as we emerge from the pandemic. That's why I'm hosting this Recovery Town Hall today. So tonight, I'll be joined by local economic, municipal, and medical experts to discuss and answer questions about programs in the American Rescue Plan, the upcoming infrastructure package, addressing the SALT deduction cap, and other recovery-related topics. To speak about American Rescue Plan program SALT and local economic relief are Mike Stanzilis, VP for Government Affairs of the Morris County Chamber of Commerce, and Bloomfield Mayor Michael Venezia, Executive Board Member of the NJ League of Municipalities. Dr. Thomas McCarrick of Vanguard Medical Group is also here to answer questions about the Delta variant vaccines and ensuring that we do not see another surge in cases. With that, I'd like to get right to questions. So we had quite a few pre-submitted for tonight's town hall. I'm going to start by asking each of our guests one of the pre-submitted questions. If you have questions, you can dial *3 on your keypad at any time to be connected with someone on my staff, and you'll be placed in the queue to ask your question live. So first of all, to focus on healthcare recovery, vaccination, reopening, and ongoing concerns, including the Delta variant, we have Dr. McCarrick, Vanguard CMO. So I'll turn first to him. So New Jersey has made great strides in vaccinating our population. As of this morning, over 5.6 million New Jerseyans have received at least one shot, with almost 5 million of them being fully vaccinated. We've made progress amongst the older population that were eligible first. So 90% of NJ residents 65 and older have had their first dose, as well as 73% of NJ residents between 18 and 64. We can thank vaccines for their role in helping stop the spread of the virus and getting our lives back to normal. After 18 months of incredible loss, I'm proud to say that for the first time since March 17, 2020, New Jersey reported 0 confirmed COVID-related deaths yesterday. That's deeply heartening. But sadly, today we saw 8 deaths reported. So I know many of you are concerned about the new variants, such as the Delta variant, as I am. That's why I'm glad to have Dr. McCarrick here today to talk about the work Vanguard Medical Group has done throughout the pandemic, address the concerns about new variants and how they interact with the vaccines we have, and also discuss the importance of getting everyone vaccinated. So Dr. McCarrick, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Congresswoman, and thank you for the opportunity to participate today. So, by way of background, I'm a family physician. I've been practicing in the Cedar Grove, Verona area for over 35 years. I'm part of a primary care practice, as you mentioned, Vanguard Medical Group, which has 10 offices across northern New Jersey. We've been very active in taking care of our patients during this pandemic. We've been open 7 days a week, except for a few major holidays. We were lucky enough to be able to work with the Department of Health in giving out the vaccine, and at this point we've given out over 15,000 doses, including over 350 of our homebound patients. So as you mentioned, we're in a good spot at the moment. In our practice, we track the positive cases daily, and in the past 7 days we've only actually had 3 positive cases, 3 positive tests from patients who were sick. And as you also mentioned, yesterday was the first day in 16 months that New Jersey had 0 deaths from COVID. So this is certainly wonderful news. But there is a risk. The risk is that we give into our fatigue dealing with this pandemic, or that we become complacent, and that we, as a result, we don't prepare for this fall. And I don't want to be overly dramatic, but I do think there is a risk that if we don't prepare, that we will see a surge that will be disruptive and challenge our medical systems and even our businesses and economy. So the reason for this possible surge is, number one, is that there's a change of season coming. And as we saw last year during the fall, particularly with the holidays resulting in indoor gatherings, we saw a surge. The second reason is that there's still a large pool of unvaccinated people. Even though we see these great numbers, there are still many people who are not vaccinated, and these viruses, or this virus, can circulate in that population. In addition to that, there is this concern about this new Delta variant, which so far seems to be about 50% more contagious than the original virus. And there are some concerns about the vaccines. We think that the vaccines hold up fairly well, although you may have seen in the news yesterday that a report from Israel that is yet to be verified suggests that the vaccine, the current Pfizer vaccine, may not provide as much protection against the Delta variant as we had thought. So this is all going to be compounded, though, by the usual seasonal colds and also the flu. So at the same time that we might have a surge in COVID, we will also have our usual seasonal colds. And last year we caught a break with the flu because many of the things that we did with social distancing and masking protected us from the flu also. But this year that's likely to come back. So I think that not only may we have a COVID surge, but I think there's going to be possibly some confusion. So I have some suggestions. As a family doctor, I can't help but give you suggestions. So let's work to get everyone vaccinated. Let's work on the hesitancy. I think everyone should try to get flu shots. As Congresswoman mentioned, let's see how much flu we can take out of the mix by getting as many folks vaccinated for flu as well as COVID. And the third thing that I have not really heard much about is that we need to have access to testing. Because when people are getting sick in the fall, the question is going to be, is this just a cold? Is it a mild case of COVID? Is it the flu? Because you're going to need to make some decisions based on what the answer to that question is. So check with your primary care doctor and think about access to testing this fall.
Well, Dr. McCarrick, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I do appreciate the advice. I think that's great advice. That's some of the things that we were discussing last summer before the vaccines came out, and I'm hoping we can see better results. We were warned last summer that the fall might prove challenging, and certainly it did. So hopefully this time around, with the vaccines and the effort to get everyone vaccinated, we can see better results. But I think it's, as you mentioned, not just about getting vaccinated against COVID, but also our flu vaccine. But speaking of hesitancy, we solicited questions from constituents before tonight, and we received quite a few questions from parents concerned about getting their younger children vaccinated. Previously, we were told COVID doesn't affect younger people as much, but over the past few weeks, we've seen new reports on the toll the virus and new variants are taking on younger Americans. Could you address the concerns that some parents are having?
Sure. Well, I think the data about infections in children is not really well established. Many children appear to have had asymptomatic or mild infections, and then there are those fewer cases. But part of the risk is actually spreading it to adults, and the information about this has gone back and forth also, that the children are highly contagious or they're not so contagious. But the more people we have in the community who are vaccinated, the quicker we can actually stamp out the vaccine spread in the community. I mean, that's really more of the bottom line than about children as a subpopulation. So I think that's really the reason, more than the risk to children themselves.
Thank you so much, and again, thank you. And now we're going to turn to another piece of our recovery efforts, the focus on our Main Street recovery and small business recovery. So we have with us tonight Mike Stanzilis of the Morris County Chamber. So let's talk a little bit about Main Street recovery. Our small businesses on Main Street throughout NJ11 and across the country really suffered throughout the pandemic. That's why I fought so hard to pass the American Rescue Plan, which included provisions such as additional funding for the Paycheck Protection Programs, the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, and the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. So since COVID began, I've been on over 20 small business walks, and I've heard from so many owners about how critical these programs have been in keeping them afloat or allowing them to keep their employees employed. In fact, today I was in Pequannock and North Haledon speaking with small business owners. And so, Mike, as the VP of Membership and Government Affairs for the Morris County Chamber, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about the impact these programs have had and what you've been doing to support small businesses throughout the pandemic.
Yes, so thank you so much, Congresswoman, for having me here today. It's a great question. When I see what's happening around with our Main Street businesses, it's an incredible story of resiliency, because these business owners are the ones that you see every day when you go into their establishments. The programs that were out there, like you mentioned, the Triple P, over and over and over again, business owners are telling me that was what bridged the gap for them, especially in the very first few months of the pandemic when no one was leaving the house. That is really what saved a lot of businesses, and then they're slowly but surely coming back. The ARP, putting more money back into the Triple P, is going to be a great opportunity, again, for them to continue on. And the unemployment piece that you're working on also, the bipartisan bill, that's another piece we really need to talk about because of staffing issues. So I don't know how much you want me to get into that just yet, or just stay right on the programs, but to a T, the Triple P has been a huge success to every business. Not everybody was easy for them to figure out. Some smaller businesses, they don't have any technical acumen, so it was a little difficult for some. A lot of the local banks around here really stepped up. The community banks especially. I'm not going to give an advertisement for the ones that I know of that really helped out our small businesses. So it was a real success story for sure.
Yeah, Mike, it was, I think, really helpful. Unfortunately, not every business really could take advantage of some of these recovery programs for various reasons. I just spoke to a business owner, Terry, in North Haledon today, and the struggle she's gone through to keep her business going through COVID, it really is really some heroic efforts to keep going. And so I just want to thank all of our business owners for keeping with it. I'm sorry about the struggles you've had. We're continuing to work to get everyone through this as best as we can and to get opened up. And I think your point, Mike, about the problems with people finding employees is critical, and we do need to talk about that. And thank you for your support of the UI bill that we put forward, the bipartisan UI bill that the U.S. Chambers endorsed as well, and we'll discuss that today too. I think it's important. But before we do, I do want to get to focus a bit on the recovery for our towns and municipalities. So the economic impact of the pandemic has been devastating. No one has seen that more closely than our mayors and local elected officials, as it has reverberated through main streets and devastated local budgets. So that's why I fought so hard to ensure the state and local funding and make sure it was included in the American Rescue Plan. That money is starting to hit the bank accounts of our local municipalities this month, which is really exciting. And tonight we have Bloomfield Mayor Michael Venezia. I'd love for you to share with us what you're hearing from mayors about what they're looking to utilize the money for, as well as to give us some insight as an executive board member of the NJ League of Municipalities on what you've all been doing throughout the pandemic to support our towns and what this funding means to municipalities throughout New Jersey. So, Mike?
Thank you, Congresswoman, for having me here. As mayor of the Township of Bloomfield, which is in the 11th District, represented by Congresswoman Sherrill, and an executive board member of the New Jersey League of Municipalities, I just want to thank you for all that you've done to advocate for municipal governments to improve our state. Thank you for including the municipal perspective in today's discussion. Earlier this week, I asked the League staff to invite several mayors from your congressional district, and I'm sure they are joining us today. During the pandemic, municipalities faced difficult choices. Revenue forecasts were down, demand for services increased, and there was no blueprint for what communities were facing or how long it would last. So thank you for your leadership and New Jersey's congressional delegation that were flexible and direct with state and local funding for municipalities that was included in the American Rescue Plan. While generally in the planning stages, and frankly, this is a new process for most municipalities, since grants we receive are first applied for and then second have strict usage and guidelines that towns we are hearing from will utilize the funding for many different things. First and foremost was to replace revenue lost to the pandemic, parking revenue, hotel and motel taxes, and many other things. Also recognizing that commercial tax appeals can impact municipalities for the next few years. Many are planning to use funds once the impact is determined. Second, working with community partners to sub-allocate funds to provide services including nutritional programs, address housing insecurity, rent and utility relief, homeless programs, and arts and education services. Next, improve the water and broadband infrastructure. Though given the likelihood of a federal infrastructure bill, municipalities we have heard from may wait to see if other funds are available for this purpose. And lastly, as a note, several municipalities have used previous CARES Act funding to assist small businesses and restaurants, rental assistance, and arts funding. We expect municipalities to enact similar programs.
Well, thanks so much. And, for all of our mayors, our elected officials, and the League, to the extent that you need support in the ways you want to use some of this money, please contact my office. The legislation was written to be quite broad to help in any way we can with the recovery effort, and we want to keep making sure that those funds are useful to our different towns. Beyond the American Rescue Plan, my colleagues and I in Washington have been looking into other ways to stimulate the economy, to get people back to work and move the country forward. So, Kelly, I know we have a few questions about getting people back to work, so I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Congresswoman. We have gotten both in the pre-submitted questions and some of the questions we're seeing come in tonight, quite a few along those lines. One of the ones that we received was from Joseph from Florham Park, who asked, with all of the difficulties local businesses are having finding employees, what are you trying to do in Washington to encourage people to rejoin the workforce?
So thanks, Kelly, and thanks, Joseph, for that question. So I'm going to discuss a bit about some of the legislation I've been working on in Washington. And then, Mike, I'll turn it over to you to discuss what the chambers have been seeing and what you're hearing from businesses about how difficult it is to find the employees that some of our businesses need. I recently introduced the Bipartisan Support Act for New Workers alongside Reps Mayer and Spanberger to address this issue and help people return to work. As I've gone on these small business walks across NJ11, I've heard time and again that business owners are having difficulty in finding employees, and these are large-scale employers down to some of our smallest micro businesses. And then, many are still struggling with childcare issues and barriers to reentering the workforce. So I've heard that too many people are having to make a choice between going back to work or keeping some of the needed benefits. And we want to make sure there's no disincentive for people going back to work. So the Support Act will provide newly employed workers with weekly payments of $180. That's equal to 60% of their previous federal pandemic unemployment compensation benefits when they return to work. So in order to help reopen businesses and speed up our economic recovery, we can tweak our approach while also supporting the workers who continue to face challenges to returning to work related to the pandemic. So this legislation will help us do both. Another bill I introduced recently is the Bipartisan Expanding Pathways to Employment Act alongside Representative McKinley, another bipartisan act. So during the recovery from the Great Recession, many unemployed Americans struggled to regain good-paying employment because they had trouble finding jobs in the fields they had previously worked in. So the ability of our workers to transition to new jobs and industries, especially when there are some job losses that will be permanent, is really critical for a faster economic recovery. And yet not all retraining programs are created equal. So my legislation would provide grant funding for the operation and expansion of evidence-based workforce development programs to help people who lost their jobs find new good-paying employment. There's strong evidence that these workforce programs can increase the wages of workers by over 20%, which will help power our economic recovery. So again, Mike, the Morris Chamber endorsed my new UI legislation along with the New Jersey Chamber and the U.S. Chamber. Do you have anything to share on your thoughts on what the impact could be and what you're hearing around the district?
Yes, so your bill, the UI bill, it incentivizes people to come back to work, which is what we need because they've been incentivized to stay home in a lot of ways. Not everybody, but a lot. What I'm hearing from, and I was sitting in front of a general manager of a restaurant a couple months ago, and she just done a hiring fair, and then the next day a guy calls her up and said, "Oh, I just got my stimulus check today. I think it was $1,400, the ones that came out a few months ago. I'm not taking the job." And I see that over and over again. When you go to a restaurant and you'll see empty tables and they can't seat you, it's because they don't have enough staff. One bigger restaurant in one of our towns had a full lobby and sent away everybody in the lobby. And what's happening is that the workers that they do have are getting burnt out because they're working double shifts. And so then they end up leaving. And there's no incentive for them to stay. So the UI bill is going to help, I think, incentivize people to come back to work. But right now, the main sector that I'm really seeing getting hurt is more so the services industry, particularly the restaurants, where we're getting hurt, both front of house and back of house, the cooks as well. So that's where we are with that. And so I applaud you for thinking out of the box to turn that around.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. And a lot of the reason I thought outside the box was certainly because of all the great advocates we have throughout the district discussing with my staff about how the difficulties they've been having. And thanks to the Chamber as well for highlighting some of the workforce issues we have in the district. Another issue that I've been working on is SALT, to help tax relief to middle-class families who are already struggling under the economic fallout of the pandemic. But of course, full disclosure, this is nothing new. This predates the pandemic. I've been working to get rid of the state and local tax deduction cap since it was implemented in 2017. So, Kelly, I'll turn it back over to you for specific questions from the district.
Yeah, we've had a lot of people, no surprise, who are wondering about what's happening with SALT and the upcoming infrastructure package. I think Keith from Pompton Lakes put it most succinctly when he asked, when will the SALT tax end? It cost my wife and me over $4,000.
So again, thanks for the question, Keith, and certainly one that we have heard for years now about the impact of the state and local tax deduction cap. I helped found the SALT caucus this year, which does go to show that there's a caucus for just about everything in Congress, but it's a bipartisan group of Congress members who have districts impacted by the state and local tax deduction cap, just like NJ 11. So we have over 30 members of Congress on both sides of the aisle in that caucus. Last month, I launched the Summer of SALT, a summer-long push to bring attention to this critical issue and turn up the heat to make sure we finally get this done for constituents. The campaign is really meant to drive home the arguments that we're making here today. Addressing the SALT deduction cap is crucial for our communities and crucial for working families. Alongside my colleagues in the bipartisan caucus, I'm going to keep working to make sure we have the full deduction. As we head into crunch time on infrastructure negotiations in Congress, I'll keep making the case to ensure that that's actually pushed into the bill. Right now, we're hearing several different ways these packages may get done. There is, from everything, it sounds like we're closing in on a good bipartisan infrastructure package, which is incredibly exciting. To see the work the president's done in enforcing bipartisan legislation and coming back again and again and again to the table to do the hard work of negotiation. The president, as do I, think Congress works best when we work together to address the needs of the American people. So we have this bipartisan infrastructure piece. It really looks like a SALT relief package would be included in the reconciliation bill. So that would be sort of another piece of this infrastructure legislation to kind of do cleanup after the bipartisan piece. So we'll see how all of this moves forward. It's still being worked out, but I am very supportive of this bipartisan track that we're seeing, which is really exciting. So Mike and Mike, do either of you have anything you want to add about the state and local tax deduction cap?
Mayor, I'll defer to you first.
Okay, thank you. New Jersey is a great but very expensive state to live in. For more than a century, the full SALT deduction was vital to ensure against double taxation and reflects tax payments which support vital public services. I want to thank Congresswoman Sherrill and the federal members that have advocated for the full deduction. The Federal Tax Cuts and Jobs Act passed in 2017 capped the SALT deduction at $10,000, which is unfair to states like New Jersey, which provide significantly more in federal tax revenue than we receive back from the federal government. The League of Municipalities strongly advocated against the passage of this provision that capped SALT deductions and has been advocating for its repeal ever since, including a 2018 resolution. Dozens of municipalities throughout the state have passed resolutions in support of this legislation that repeals the SALT cap as well.
Thanks so much, Mayor. And then Mike Stanzilis, do you have anything to add about SALT?
I mean, I think Mike said it really great. I would just say that there's a lot of money that would go back into the local economies by repealing this SALT, putting the money back in the homeowners' pockets, who then spend it in our local economies, helping our businesses, which is really the Chamber's focus to keep our businesses in business. And
certainly, as a Congresswoman advocating for a state that always gives more to the federal government than we get back, keeping our money here in our local economy, especially after the last year and a half, is really important. So I will continue to advocate for SALT and hope to see it in one of the next packages that we put forward. Okay, I'll turn it back over to Kelly for the next question.
Okay, great. We're going to go to some of our live questions now. And just a reminder to everybody, if you want to be screened to talk to one of our staff members, you can dial *3 to talk to somebody, and we will have the opportunity to bring your question live. Our first question is from Daryl from Denville, who has a question about vaccines for transplant patients.
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you for taking my call. I'm a double lung transplant recipient, and I had the Pfizer vaccine. I had the first and second, and my transplant pulmonologist demanded that I take a donor-specific antibody test and a COVID antibody test. And I found out that I got no immunity whatsoever from the vaccine, and it's because of my immunosuppressant regimen. Mm-hmm. There's been some research that suggests that maybe a third shot or a booster round might be helpful for people like me. And there are thousands of New Jerseyans. I know this because I volunteer with New Jersey Sharing Network. There are thousands of New Jerseyans who are in the same position, but nobody is advocating for us. Nobody is talking about this research. And the problem is, if we don't have immunity, that means it's not safe for us to go back to work. It's not safe no matter what else is happening in society. As long as that virus is being transmitted, we are the same risk as we were last year. So I was just wondering if anybody is going to be advocating for this, and what, if anything, do you know about this?
Well, thanks so much. To be quite frank with you, Daryl, I had not heard of some of this research, and I'm happy that you brought this up. I'm going to turn it over to hear from Dr. McCarrick, but I'm also happy. We have different members of my staff on the line, some of our caseworkers who can also reach out to you to get more information and see what needs to be done to support advocating for people like yourself. But Dr. McCarrick, I'm going to turn that over to you.
Sure, that's a great question, Daryl, and I'm sorry to hear about that. You know, it turns out that about 30% of folks like you who have had transplants and are on immunosuppressive medications to keep those transplants from being attacked by the immune system are having the same issue. They're not responding to even 2 doses of the current vaccines. There is some research, which is early, is suggesting that a 3rd dose actually might be a charm, and there's a bit of a precedent for this because, for example, with hepatitis B vaccine, when healthcare workers get their doses and don't get a response, they get an additional dose to see if that can do the trick. So I think I've seen in the medical news in the past weeks that there are quite a number of transplant centers that are raising this point and are asking for the CDC to come out with some guidelines on this. So I think it's going to come because there is a rapidly accumulating amount of information about this, and I think it's just that folks really can't act on their own without the CDC guidance telling them that in these situations we should be giving a 3rd dose. So hopefully this will get answered very soon.
Thanks so much, Doctor, and thanks so much, Daryl, for flagging this for us. And my team will follow up with you to get some of these details as well. And then, Kelly, I'll turn it back over to you for the next question.
Great. Our next question is going to come from Lisa from Morris Plains, who has a question about the COVID state and local federal money.
Yes, hi. Thank you for taking my call. My question is regard to hearing a lot of local politicians talking about the federal money and how it's going to be spent and all the rules attached to it. And I was wondering if federal money is allowed to be spent on mental health services, as I've been reading that the pandemic is only just the beginning, that mental health is going to be a long-lasting issue long past the pandemic. And so many people without really good insurance, thankfully I do have good insurance, but other people are not able to afford mental health services.
Lisa, that is a great question. As you may know, we've had several mental health town halls during the pandemic. I've worked with the VA on some of the mental health issues that our veterans are suffering from, especially related to the pandemic and getting services for mental health issues during the pandemic. And we are seeing a shortage of some of those services. However, it has been one of our top priorities, so I'm happy to report that mental health services are an allowable use of the ARP state and local funding. I fought for that to be included, so we're happy to see that included in one of the allowable uses of the ARP funding. The Department of Health and Human Services has also issued block grants to states specifically for mental health, and New Jersey has received over $75 million in that block grant. And I also submitted, we have now community projects that we have been able for the first time in a while for members of Congress to submit specific funding requests for different community projects. And my office submitted one for a mental health-focused community project. There's also, the ARP has also directed $120 billion in K through 12 funding. That also can be used for student mental health services. We've been hearing a lot of concerns about our student population and the mental health issues related in part to homeschooling, to being isolated at a critical kind of developmental phase, and then some of the rigors of then returning to school and that impact as well. So that money too. So there's a lot of support for mental health services. I don't know, Dr. McCarrick, if you wanted to add anything to the discussion of mental health support.
Well, just that it's just that there's a real need for it. I guess we've seen this in our practice. The combination of behavioral health and also opioid substance abuse issues has been dramatically higher this year. We've seen many people trying to access services, but I think we're not even meeting the needs. It's just my own subjective sense is that there are many patients, many people who are still suffering, who just have not been able to access care. There's the behavioral health system is overloaded at the moment. It's hard to find therapists. It's hard to find psychiatrists. The formal programs are generally overloaded as well. So I think this is an issue and will be for some time.
You know, Doctor, that's a great point, and something we've been working on is figuring out pathways to training for mental health experts, because we're putting this money out, but it's not simply a funding problem. It's really having people on the ground with that expertise, and hopefully some of this funding can go towards the training program. So we'll continue to work towards that, because we have heard throughout the pandemic of really the mental health challenges and have been seeing them really across the board. From, we hear it from our schools, we hear it from our VA, we hear it from our care providers. So we'll certainly continue to push for greater support as we continue the recovery. And then, Kelly, I'll turn it back over to you for our next question.
Great. And I just want to remind everybody again, in case anybody's joining us late here, if you have questions, you can dial *3 at any time to be connected to someone on our staff, and you'll be placed in the queue to ask your question live. Our next question is from David in Randolph with a question about EIDL loans.
Hi, yes, I appreciate you taking my question. I appreciate you having this town hall. So I'm basically approved for EIDL, and it's in process. And, I spoke to the SBA about a month ago, and they said, yep, you're in there. But there's they said they had something like 1 million applicants. And according to the reports that they're releasing, they're only processing about 2,000 to 3,000 a week. So if I do the math, that's quite a long time before they're all going to be processed. So I'm a little bit concerned about when we could be expecting that.
Sure. And we've certainly been very concerned about this process, because I absolutely understand how critical these loans have been for our businesses. And that's why the good news is, and I was happy to see that the ARP expanded the EIDL program funding by $15 billion for our hard-hit small businesses. But the application approval part has been, from what we've seen, the longest part of the process. And the SBA sometimes can be a bit opaque in dealing with them, but our staff has been very involved in the process, and we have helped many people get their status updated. So it sounds like you've heard back, but please feel free to reach out to my office. We can continue to help check on your application status. And our casework team has been helping small business owners with these issues. Again, we'd be happy to contact the SBA on your behalf. And Mike Stanzilis, I'm not sure if you've heard from your business that you've probably been hearing the same thing our casework team's been hearing about how long sometimes this process can take.
Yes, and some people get frustrated, and I've had a couple of businesses just say they gave up. So we would appreciate any work you can do behind the scenes for the businesses. That would be very helpful. Feel free to reach out to us. We do have an in-house expert that helps businesses. His name is Ed Ramirez with the Morris County Economic Development Corporation, which sits within the chamber. So, call the main number and we'll definitely guide you in that if you need help.
That's great. Thanks, Mike. Maybe if we all push from our end, we can speed up that process. Because it has been far more slow moving than I think any of us would like. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Kelly.
Great. Our next question is going to come from Patricia from Jefferson.
Oh, hello. Hi, Mikie. This is Patricia.
Hi.
How are you?
Hi, how are you?
Thank you for everything that you do. And I'm happy to be able to ask this question. However, it really doesn't pertain to anything that you're talking about right now, but it's something that is concerning me very much. And it's about January 6th, 2021. And all I want to know is why so many Democrats are keeping silent about it and not speaking up about what has happened to our country. Our country was attacked from within, and it's just such a disgrace to the history of our democracy. And I know that the Speaker is forming a committee and to investigate, but I'm wondering, as a Congresswoman, what can you do, and what can the other Congress people do? It just is something that I can't let go of, and it bothers me 24 hours a day that these people are being allowed to remain in office when they don't care about our government. Anyway, I just wanted to hear your thoughts on it, and thank you again for everything that you do.
Oh, thank you. As you can imagine, having been face down in the chamber when it was attacked on January 6th, and sitting there with a gas mask in one hand and my phone as I was calling my husband in the other, and having members of the Capitol Police barring the door with their guns drawn as people were trying to break down the door. I do not have the will or the desire to let it go myself. I think it was the worst attack on our democracy that we have seen, and we have got to get to the bottom of it. I think the best way to do that would have been an independent, bipartisan commission. And quite frankly, that was something that Kevin McCarthy deputized Katko, Representative Katko, to go negotiate. He basically got everything he asked for. And yet at the end of the day, Republicans refused to move forward with that. The majority. We did see 35 Republicans who I think stood up, many of them veterans, who voted in favor of that commission, because I think, every single person in the House of Representatives has taken an oath to the Constitution. And part of that oath says that we will protect the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And so it is our duty, I feel, and I feel this very strongly, to get to the bottom of what happened on January 6th, to ensure that it never happens again, and that we can form a more resilient democracy. This, to me, is critical in order to ensure our nation flourishes. I believe deeply in our democratic system of government, and I think those of us who've looked into it know that sometimes democracies, because we're open to ideas and information, and we don't shut it down, and we don't close off information from people, that sometimes we can be taken down from within. And we have to ensure that that never happens in this country. So I have advocated strongly for that commission. Since we don't have the independent bipartisan one, the Speaker is forming one within Congress. It's probably the first time this sort of committee was formed and the Speaker appointed a bipartisan group. So we will see who Leader McCarthy determines he will appoint to the committee. I hope they are serious-minded members and not people who will just be working to take down the committee, because we do have to get to the bottom of this. And I think it will be critical that we understand fully what happened. And we've seen, as reports come out, we've seen that there were members that were, rallying the crowds before the attack on our Capitol. We've seen that there were people who attacked the Capitol that had done far more planning than maybe we originally understood, including, and this is what I was worried about with the people that were inside the Capitol complex the day before that should not have been there and that were in the tunnels. They had sketches of the tunnels and plans for blocking off the tunnels so that they could attack members and police. And we have seen an attempt now from too many members to whitewash this. One member of Congress calling it a normal tourist event, which I can assure you, having been on the House floor, it was not. And you just have to watch some of the video of that day to know that when people are attacking Capitol Police, when a Capitol policeman almost lost his life, when several committed suicide afterwards, when one person was tased so many times, he had a heart attack, that was not a normal tourist event. And we need to ensure that we can form a more resilient democracy. So I will do everything in my power to ensure that we can do so. And I can assure you that there are many members of Congress who feel the same way that I do. So we will continue to move forward on this effort. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Kelly.
Great. And I'm going to go to one of our pre-submitted questions now. We had well over 100 pre-submitted questions, so we want to make sure we get some of those in as well. The next question is from Josh from West Orange. Will you make your support of the bill contingent on restoring the SALT deductions? Congresswoman, are you there? Are you on mute maybe?
It's only been a year and a half, and I still was, I'm sorry to report to everyone, I gave a really brilliant answer, but I will start over. Hopefully it will be as good as everything I said on mute. But no, in all seriousness, it's a key priority. And we can do both. We can do both infrastructure and we can address the state and local tax deduction cap. And I've said that is a bright line for me, that we have got to get that passed. It looks, if we do this in a two-track system, which has been discussed, it looks like the state and local tax deduction cap will be addressed in the reconciliation part of the package. But I have told the White House, I've told Janet Yellen, I've told leadership, I've told the Ways and Means Committee, Richie Neal, I've told the Speaker, I've told Leader Hoyer, anyone who will listen. I have said that we have got to address this, and with the SALT caucus and over 30 members, I don't see a pathway for that reconciliation bill if it does not address the state and local tax deduction cap. So that is something that I will continue to work on to get into that package.
Okay, great. And we're going to pull one other one from our pre-submitted questions to make sure we're getting to those. This is from Robert. Has the FDA approved any of the vaccines other than for emergency use? If not, is there an estimated date?
So the Pfizer, Moderna, and J&J vaccines have each been approved, as you've alluded to, for emergency use. Pfizer and Moderna have applied for full use approval, and the FDA is working to grant this authorization, but there's currently no official timeline for when this will happen. And I've been asking about this. For those of you who served in the military like I did, you might be surprised to hear that the COVID vaccine is not mandatory. I was surprised to hear that because I remember not wanting to receive the anthrax vaccine and yet being told while I was in the military in Bahrain that I did not have a choice. But the military, for example, has not been mandating that because it's only on emergency use authorization. I do want to stress that even though they were approved under emergency use, there's really strong evidence that these vaccines work and that they are safe for Americans to use. So the best way to save lives and return to normal is to get vaccinated. In fact, this new strain that we're so worried about is really taking hold in places with very low vaccine rates. I read a story this morning about a woman who was afraid of getting vaccinated and died from COVID. So we really do need to continue to get people vaccinated. It is the safest way to ensure you're not hospitalized, to ensure that you don't die from COVID. And I'm going to kick it over once again to Dr. McCarrick to add anything that you've heard. Doctor?
Just a small point. I think you made all the major points on that. I think the full FDA approval is not just about is the vaccine effective and it's safe. They also look at the manufacturing processes. There's a lot of detail about how the vaccine is made to make sure that the continuing pipeline of the vaccine is safe for the population. And I would think that the FDA wants to be really comprehensive so that by the time that they give this full approval, the American public can have full confidence that the FDA did not rush this, did not short-circuit it, and that it really got the full attention, the full scrutiny that it really deserves. And we just hope that they can do this more quickly.
Thanks so much. That was a great point. Back to you, Kelly.
Great. Our next question comes from Richard about another question about the infrastructure bill.
Hello, Congresswoman. It's a pleasure to speak to you today, calling from a resident of Trenton. I'm calling primarily because there was a bipartisan effort to finally get an infrastructure bill passed somewhat, and we looked at approximately $1.2 trillion. And shortly thereafter, the first thing that happened with one of the lead Democrats was to propose reconciliation. If, in fact, there is reconciliation, do you support reconciliation that would direct some dollars toward pandemic relief at this particular time?
Thanks. Yes. So we have seen several iterations of how we are going to get this bill passed with all the things we need to do for jobs and recovery. There's several different ways we might do this. One of the ways is to have the bipartisan infrastructure bill passed, and I do support that bipartisan infrastructure bill, and have that passed, and then have a reconciliation bill to provide support for some of the key things that our state needs. So we've seen some good efforts in the bipartisan bill at making our infrastructure, our power infrastructure more resilient. As many of you know, in fact, I was just in Pequannock today, and there's still houses without power because of the storm last night. I think because of environmental, the environmental changes we've seen more hurricanes, flooding, wildfires, tornadoes, et cetera. So we do need to make the infrastructure more resilient. Some of the other areas, though, that are not supported as well are things like an electric car grid. So we have countries across the world who are saying, especially the UK, saying that in a couple years, in a few years, they're not going to be purchasing any more combustible engine cars. So we want to make sure that we support our car industry here so we can continue, as we traditionally have to make cars that we export across the world. In New Jersey, with the most densely populated state, is great for an electric car grid, for example. So we want to support that. We want to support some investments in clean energy. We in New Jersey have the largest investment in offshore wind. We want to support child care. So I can tell you that as a working mom, our child care, and where child care was before the pandemic was not good. I have quite a few friends who left the workforce for a couple of years because they simply could not find affordable child care for their young children. And so we have needed to address that and develop that anyway. And the pandemic, now we've seen hundreds of child care facilities close over the pandemic. So there are some very important things that we would add in the reconciliation bill. And that's why I've supported the True Track, because I do believe it's important to have the bipartisan bill and to work in a bipartisan manner. But there are critical things to the workforce that we also need to get passed. And I'll see if Mike Stanzilis or Michael Venezia has anything, if either one of you have anything to add about workforce development and any critical things that you're hoping to see in these infrastructure packages.
As always, I'll defer to the mayor first.
No, thanks, Mike. The only thing I will say is that a lot of our labor unions have excellent workforce development, and are like, I know in Essex County we have a great department that handles a lot of that, and I think when the money from the infrastructure bill does start coming down to the county, the state, and localities, I think it's going to be a great thing to have the ability to train people in some of these jobs that are going to be available.
Yes, and we hear the word onshoring a lot, meaning bringing back some jobs that have been offshored, but we have to make sure that we're prepared for those because they're not going to look like what they were when they were offshored. So bringing back, certain manufacturing bases nowhere near reflective of what it once was when it was offshored. So we need to definitely train and prepare our workforce, and our local county college here is a great proponent of that also, with what they've got going on with their their apprenticeship program. And so they're really there's a lot of opportunities here to train the workforce of the future. We don't even know what that's going to look like, so it's a very important subject to discuss further.
That is, I think both of you had some great flags. I think we've seen, our unions looking at how they can prepare the workforce, especially for some of this infrastructure. I get asked all the time about the Gateway Tunnel project, which I'm always happy to discuss. Somehow we dodged that a little bit tonight, but anybody who wants can get an earful from me usually about how critical and important that is. And we just had the Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, here to look at how critical that piece of infrastructure is and all the jobs that would generate. And then also our county colleges. I cannot say enough good things about the training that our county colleges are doing for the workforce and working with so many of our local employers on that workforce development. Part of the reason I joined the Education and Labor Committee in this Congress is to support that workforce development, to make sure we have the apprenticeship programs, that we have the development programs at our county colleges, that we are ensuring that we have the workforce of tomorrow. Because you're exactly right, Mike. When we onshore those jobs, we're not going back to the Industrial Revolution, right? The high-tech manufacturing we do in the 11th District is so beyond what I think anybody thinks of as manufacturing, and the computer programs involved and the training involved and the retraining involved as new machines come online is really exceptional. So that's a great flag. So I just want to thank all of our panelists. We are always so incredibly lucky to have really, really wonderful panelists, and you three have been no exception. So I'd like to thank Dr. McCarrick, Mike Stanzilis, and Michael Venezia for joining us for this telephone town hall. Thanks for taking the time to talk with us. As I've mentioned, I've done quite a few small business walks, and I do hear about how helpful these have been to people. So if you didn't get your question in tonight, my team and I are ready to help get you an answer. So you can email my office at sherrill.house.gov/contact or call our offices. Our DC office number is 202-225-5034, and our district office is 973-526-5668. My casework team has been monitoring the questions and will reach out to people as needed to see how we can be helpful. And before we log off, I'll say one more thing. Throughout the pandemic, our telephone town halls have allowed me to stay connected with all of you and have helped to answer questions about the most pressing issues we've faced over the past year. So I'm so thankful for this technology and for all of my constituents who've tuned in and participated over the phone, sometimes over the Zoom, et cetera. So I've received a lot of feedback that people really like phoning in from home or work, and the number of people that phone into these town halls really shows that. So I hope we can continue to find a way to utilize this technology going forward. We'll continue to do these. But that being said, I also think there's a lot to be said for having an in-person town hall. So we are going to do that in the early fall as everybody kind of is back from vacation. So I can't wait to see everyone in person again. Please follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram for the latest updates from my office about that event and others coming up this summer. I also have a newsletter with updates on my work in Washington and in the district. So you can sign up for that at sherrill.house.gov. Thanks again, everyone. Stay safe, stay healthy, take care, and thank you once more to our wonderful panelists. Have a great night.